I'm going to show you how to build this table with no joiner, no big boy planers, and no overpriced equipment that has the word Festool on the side of it. I'll even cover an oopsie that made me $2,000 less rich. More about that in a bit. Before I get all sawdusty, I want to hit the pain buttons one more time as to why I'm replacing this table in the first place. For starters, it is made from basic construction grade lumber, 2x8 material on the top, 4x4 material for the bottom, 1x4 material on the bracing. It is, I'm going to say, basic. Another thing is I added this leaf on the front, which you can open up, but because of how long and awkward it is and how skinny the legs are together, if you open up the leaf, you put a dime onto it and the whole thing just teeters and falls forward. So that's no good. That's been decoration ever since it came to fruition. Another factor is in order to get to our basement, you have to move the chairs, the rug, everything off the tabletop, the bar stools, and the table in order to open the hatch. And in a tornado situation, you don't have that much time, especially because I'm stopping to have a meal in between. That's a lot to do. I also had no way of filling in or planing down the top, so you can feel the imperfections of this tabletop and see all of the little knot holes and spots and blemishes. And I think people have just been nice over time and not brought it up, but they're clearly there. And that's also keeping me up at night. So without further ado, let's head on out to the shop and replace this baby. So I traded my father 2 Kentucky wood slabs for some black walnut. After I tweaked the plans to fit the lumber I have for the project, I got to work. I sorted through the material, some was a different thickness, and I needed the longest possible pieces for the top. And I definitely want this live edge section for the front. Let me show you how to get perfectly straight boards using only your circular saw. Maybe that's all you have available, maybe the pieces are too large for you to safely rip down on your table saw. I'm ripping the boards down to 5 inches wide, so I don't have huge, wide pieces for the top like the previous table. I measure in 5 inches, plus the distance from my blade to the base's edge, which is 1.5 inches. So measure in 7.5 inches and draw a line. Set up your quote, track saw fence. However, my blade guard flipper will be in the way. So I measured in from the opposite direction in order to make my cut. Then repeat the steps to cut your board to size until you have however many boards you think you need to make your tabletop. I'm using 4. Here is a good representation of the stress these boards are carrying. I feel you, buddy. I feel you. Prep the area you are going to use for your glue up. A big thanks to today's sponsor, Hefty, because collecting garbage isn't their only use. Just kidding. Make sure you have all the knots and blemishes where you want them prior to glue up. I'm using a Titebond 2 because it's a little thicker. Don't get me wrong, it's still a big gluey mess, but it's thicker. I also added clamps to keep the boards level with each other, so planing is a little easier since it's going to be done by hand. And if you guys have ever questioned why the parallel clamps are so expensive compared to the regular bar clamps, let me tell you, if you use them side by side, you'll know that answer. And there she is. Time to throw my back out by moving it out of the way. Moving on to the legs, since they are going to be painted, I am using a 2x4. I know. They can warp and twist, and it's not a material I should use when making the legs, and compared to black walnut, what are you doing? But I'm going to give it a shot. My countertop is 31.25 inches tall, minus the tabletop thickness of 7/8 of an inch. I'm left with 30 3/8 of an inch. Oh, and by the way, the countertop is 35.25 inches. That's what I get for reading it from across the garage. So, thank goodness these are just simple 2x4s. That is much better. Ripping down some birch double-sided plywood, I created the shelves for the front of the table. I'm adding a few pocket holes for mounting. I also labeled the tops to save a little frustration down the road. Then, glue and nail the sides and the back. Hold everything in place. It's been 2 days, so I can safely remove the clamps from the tabletop, and she's looking real purty. Okay, back to the shelves under the front. I took a thinner 1/2 inch piece and created a straight edge. Then I ripped a strip down to 3/4 of an inch. This is to frame in the shelves. I also cut a 12-inch piece for in between them, so I can install this outlet. which has plugins on the front and back. It's pretty cool. I cut those to size and glued them into place so that the front had a little touch of black walnut. It would have been nice if this outlet came with a template. Find the center, draw the area you need to cut out, and repeat for the other direction. Drill the corners out so it's easier for your jigsaw, and you have a perfect fit. Rip the board down to size and check your fit. I am recessing mine behind the shelf framing to add a little depth. A little elbow grease to make things smooth. Finish off with a light sanding. And after all that work, flip it over and restart. I'd say that's pretty dang good. Now we need to cut everything square. I'm using a speed square and my level. I'm leaving mine as big as possible, but if you had a desired length in mind, measure and cut one end, and then measure down to the other end. After correcting the bow in this board, I ripped it down to 3 inches to match the height of the shelving under my top. Then I cut the boards down to their exact length before adding some pocket holes to connect everything together. I rough cut my legs to length. Using blue tape, I locked them together so I can cut all of them to the identical length, 35 1/4. Let me double check. Yep, that's the one. Starting with the side that we will see most often, I screwed down the leg and continued to assemble the shelving supports as I worked my way down. This leg in the middle lines up with the edge of my countertop, adds support, and I can permanently anchor the table into the counter for stability. I'm adding 2 shelves for storage since this space would be wasted otherwise. Well, it's still kind of wasted because unless the crockpot goes on a diet, it is not going to fit in here anyways. But I'm adding them regardless. Not sure how that happened. I must be getting overheated because what the heck? There are a few thinner boards in the pile that I'm going to use for the slats. They do pass the length test, so let's rip them down. I'm doing a 1-inch gap, 1.5-inch sliver of wood to add stability to the thin legs and also add a design to the front without filling the entire thing with wood. This board I'll have to use for the thinner side because even after cutting it, it's still pretty wonky. I measured down 1 inch from the top and marked a level line, then repeated that for all the legs. My first slivers are going to be used as templates so that the rest are exactly the same size, and this helps keep the legs square. A little glue and 2 pin nails will hold these in place perfectly. Continue that pattern until you reach the top. I used some scrap to equally space the slats instead of measuring each time. It just so happens this little sliver was perfectly 1 inch wide. Instead of lining up the piece, cutting it too small, getting a new piece, cutting it, trimming it down by 30 seconds of an inch until it fits perfectly, I ended up just using my flush cut saw after I had nailed and clamped everything in place. Attach the shelving with pocket screws from underneath. I cut a bunch of little trim pieces to match the long strips, so I could match the legs aesthetic and leave the storage area open. And all of these little slivers will finish the interior of the legs. I didn't want to wrap them all the way around so that the leg had some vertical visibility. I'm using a pick to clear out some of the dead, rotting, ugly spots. Once cleared out, I grab a rasp and clean it out some more. Do this for any blemishes on the top. To prep for epoxy, I mark each spot I want to fill. I don't want to get overwhelmed and miss anything. The spots that go 100% through the top, I taped from underneath. Prep everything. The epoxy I have is a 2-part amazing clear cast from Hobby Lobby. I also have some liquid pigment. I mix it up and it's not getting hot like usual. Part B should be a yellowish color, like if you're dehydrated. If it's more of a red, it's no good. So I'm going to do a test area to see if this epoxy I have is going to actually harden. Looks like it's set up just fine. One more mix to finish the big pour and it's all good. I thought it would be a struggle to remove the blue tape afterwards, but it was quite the opposite, and it left me with very clean edges. Best experience with blue tape I've ever had. 80% of my time has been spent sanding. Let's make that 92%. Testing a few stain colors, I'm leaning towards the natural. And now staining the black walnut. Everything pine I am painting to match my kitchen cabinets. No plans for this build. I have a generic sketch that has some sizing on there if you guys want that for a reference, but this is very specific to my space, so that's kind of why it was a quick run through on more technique than measurements and how to build. So, hope you enjoyed the video and go build something. Yo, Vossy, it's your boy, David P. Hey, I got a guy. He's looking for a black walnut birdhouse. He needs it by this weekend for his daughter's quinceañera. If you got any black walnut, he said he's going to pay top dollar, like $2,000. He's buying her this bird. It's an indoor project. Doesn't have to be over the top. Hey, give me a call back. I got like 10 minutes to give him an answer. All right, bye.